On today's show, Evan Mobley had an outstanding fourth season for the Cavs, but what did he do that well, and what does he need to get better on before next season gets here? We're going to discuss that on today's edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? My name's Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like my Substack, The Inside Shot, Cleveland Magazine, 92.3 The Fan, and a number of other stops along the way. I want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching the show on YouTube as we get started here on this Friday, make sure you do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for me, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 in bonus bets when their first $5 bet wins with FanDuel. Starting a new series here on Locked On Cavs today, we are going to be starting our player season in review, where we are going to talk about what went well, what didn't go well. We're going to do this for just about every player on the roster as this offseason rolls on. Of course, this is not going to be an everyday thing, probably going to be doing 2 or 3 of these a week just because there's so much else still going on. But I did want to start this series off with Evan Mobley because while I don't think he was the best player on the Cavs this season, I think that honor goes to Donovan Mitchell. I don't think that is a controversial statement, but I think that he, moving forward, is the most important player for the Cavs. So I thought it was important to start this series off with him. But this year, Evan's 4th year in the NBA was by and large the best season that he's had. I thought that he took very significant steps offensively. Defensively, I thought he was obviously great. He won Defensive Player of the Year award. I thought that was well-deserved. I don't know how many, if any more, he's going to get of those in his career, but I do think it's appropriate that when we at some point, and this is obviously very far down the road, but at some point when we're talking about what Evan Mobley's career was like, I think it's very important that he has this award because he deserves it. Like, he's that caliber of a defender. But as we go through the year, I think that there were sort of two different versions of Evan Mobley that we saw offensively. And right away, I think the thing that stood out with Evan was right away how much more aggressive he was on the offensive end of the floor this year as opposed to last year. And I thought if you go back, if you can put yourself in a time machine and go back to October 23rd, when the Cavs played in Toronto, they beat the Raptors by 30 points, and Evan Mobley had 25 points, 9 boards, 3 assists, was a plus 31 in that game. And what stood out, because so much of the conversation about Evan last offseason, during training camp, in the preseason, was about, Evan needs to take more three-pointers. He needs to be more of a high-volume three-point shooter. Not that he's ever going to have to go out there and be Channing Frye or Karl Anthony Towns, guys taking, and even Karl doesn't take that many, even though he should. But guys that are taking like 8 to 9 a game, nobody expected Evan to be that. And I don't think that would have been properly utilizing him on the offensive end of the floor. But there was an expectation that he was going to take more three-pointers than he did in the past. But you go back to that first game in Toronto, and I do think that the Toronto Raptors are a team that Evan is always going to be a little bit more up for that game because Scotty Barnes is on the other side, and Scotty Barnes won the Rookie of the Year over Evan a few years back in an award that I think a lot of people would probably, if they could go back in time, would probably change their vote. That did vote for Scotty just because of the way that their careers have panned out. Like, I think it would be more appropriate if Evan were the Rookie of the Year, and he certainly deserved that way back when. But in that game, he only took 2 threes. And in that game, he was, I thought, ultra aggressive at getting to the basket. I thought that he was a guy, and, we didn't necessarily use this word at the time, and I think this became more of a word later into the season, into the postseason, but he played with a tremendous amount of force in that game. And I thought early on that was sort of the story of Evan's season, because then you think to a few games later when the Lakers are in town, Evan has 25 points in 19 minutes. We're in a game that the Cavs win by 24 and it wasn't even that close. Doesn't take a three. He's 12 of 16 from the floor, doesn't take a single three in that game. And it kind of brought the conversation, oh, does he need to shoot threes? And I don't think that he was anybody that we really considered to be even a medium volume 3-point shooter until December. In the first month and a half of the season, Evan Mobley didn't have a game with more than 3-point attempts in it. And I think that he was a different player, and this is obviously a good thing. I think that while he was awesome early this season, and he was, I think he was a different player after the month of December rolled around. So the first game the Cavs played in December, the first two games the Cavs played in December were nothing to write home about for Evan. They beat Boston in a game that they won because Donovan Mitchell was great in the fourth quarter. And then they beat Washington in, I believe that was actually an NBA Cup game that didn't matter, but it was a game that Evan played 31 minutes and the Cavs won by like 35. Then the Denver Nuggets came to town and Evan Mobley hit 3 out of 5 3-pointers that he attempted. And that was sort of like a seed, like this guy can do it. He can be this medium volume 3-point shooter. And that was not like Evan's best game of the year. He had 20 points and 9 boards in what was, I thought, a very nice Cavs win, 7 of 11 from the floor. But the fact that he took 5 threes was like, see, this is possible. And then he followed that up a couple of nights later with that game in Charlotte. And to me, as you look at Evan Mobley's season, that game in Charlotte against the Hornets, and it was a Saturday afternoon. The Cavs won that game 116-102. It was probably closer than it needed to be, but Evan Mobley in that game, 41 points, 10 boards, 6 of 8 from 3, 16 of 23 from the floor. He was outstanding, and I think he hit 4 threes in the first quarter, if I'm not mistaken. I don't have that box score pulled up, but I do think he had 4 threes in the first quarter. And it was kind of like, oh my goodness. And that was kind of the moment where you started getting texts from people around the league. And it's just, I remember one text I got from somebody that just said, it's happening. Like that game to me was sort of the turning point in Evan Mobley, like what he not turned into offensively, but sort of a blueprint for what he's going to be moving forward. Because up until that point, Mobley was taking 2 3-pointers a game. He was shooting 31% on threes, which is nothing to write home about. This is up to before the game against the Denver Nuggets. That will be kind of our turning point when we talk about him here. But when you look at from that game against the Denver Nuggets on, Evan was a different offensive player. Evan changed who he was offensively. After that, so in the first however many games that was, he took 2 threes a game. After that, he took almost 4 threes a game and shot 38% on threes from that moment on. So when I look at that Denver game, when I look at that Charlotte game, and the Charlotte one certainly is more memorable, but the Denver one was kind of a sign of things to come, if that makes sense. But that was what changed him offensively. When I think of this season for Evan, he had a lot of really good moments, and he was obviously, I mean, he took a tremendous leap to go from somebody who had never made an all-star team to making his first all-star team, being named second team All-NBA, his second first team All-Defense, his first defensive player of the year. I think that there's a case that he made. I actually, no, I shouldn't say that. I do think he made the biggest leap on the Cavs this year. The question I'm going to have moving forward, and we will talk about this in a minute, is can he take a leap the same size next year? That is going to be one of the things that continues to define this Cavs team and certainly defines Evan Mobley. But if you look at those games in December, those were the games that were a sign of things to come. Because before that moment, he was just somebody that it almost felt as if when he was shooting threes, they were wide open and you're kind of like, well, I better take this shot. And he had the game against Denver was the first game that he had where he took more than three-point attempts. And after that, he had 28 games, or excuse me, no, he had 29 games of the final 50 games that he played where he took at least 4 threes. So that was a big evolution that we saw happen in real time this season, which I do think is a really cool thing. It's fun to see guys throughout the season because so much of this is you expect somebody to come back from their summer, from their off season where they're in the lab all year, right? And you expect them to just come back and be a different product when the season starts than what they were the year before. And I don't know if Evan was a different product when the season started than what he was the year before. It might be a better way to just say, it might just be best to say he was a more aggressive version of the guy he was last year. And even last year's a little unfair just because of the injuries that he dealt with in the previous season. But it almost felt as if he was just a more aggressive version of the same guy. And then throughout the season, you saw him transform into a better, more well-rounded, more complete. And it's not to say that he's done developing, and I don't think that he is. I think there are certainly things that he needs to do to take the next step offensively, but into a more complete offensive player. That is something that I think is really cool to watch happen in real time, because the guy that he was on October 23rd in that season opening game against the Toronto Raptors was not the same guy that he was when the playoffs arrived. He was a different caliber of player. And I think that's a really, really good thing. I think that is something that bodes well for the future. You watch this guy develop in real time over the course of the regular season. Now, I certainly expect him, when the regular season gets here, to be a better player in this upcoming October than he was when the playoffs ended last month. But what does he need to do this summer? What needs to change? We're going to talk about that next right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NBA playoffs are in full swing. I mean, did you see what happened last night? I did. I can't say that I didn't expect that, because with the Indiana Pacers, I think you should always expect that. But my goodness, man. I mean, if you had the Pacers plus 10.5, you feel great right now. And if you have the Pacers, if you were one of the brave people to pick the Pacers to win this series, you probably feel better than you did 24 hours ago. I don't know that you still feel great, but you probably feel better than you did. And you certainly cannot get them at the same value today than you could the other day. Although, if you didn't bet the series, now might be the right time to bet on Oklahoma City, just because that number still not a ton of value. But before the series, the Thunder were at, I think it was minus 700 on FanDuel to win the finals, which, you know, that is pretty significant. Now they're minus 330. It's not the best value, but it's much better value than what it was. So I do think that is something that's just worth keeping in mind. And FanDuel, if you want to keep that in mind, FanDuel is the place to keep it in mind with, because they make it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live, like this series. I mean, I don't want to say this is live, but you're a game into the series. It's kind of live betting on the series. So with player props, performance trends, same game parlays, and so much more, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. And if you're new to FanDuel, now is the perfect time to sign up, because you can head to FanDuel.com. That is FanDuel.com. Place your first $5 bet. If that first $5 bet wins, you will get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. Like I said earlier, you can find us anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Make sure you drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. So what does Evan Mobley need to do this summer and even into next year? And of course, I will have player preview podcasts late this summer, early this fall, before the season gets started. But what does he need to focus on? What are the areas where he needs to take a jump between what he was at the end of this postseason before next season starts? Like, where are the areas that we look at and say, Evan needs to be better at this? Like, if Evan does this, you're going to feel really good about him. You're going to feel really good about the Cavs. And I think a lot of this is offensively. It's really hard for me to look at what he's done throughout his career defensively, what he did this year defensively, where he was defensive player of the year. Like, it's difficult for me to look at that and say, yeah, he really needs to improve this area defensively. Like, I think a lot of this has to do with being on the offensive side of the floor. And I think that's probably how it should be for him. And the thing that I look at the most And I know a lot of the conversation about him is always going to be about the 3-point shooting. And the way that I think about this is a little bit less of that. Not saying he needs to shoot threes less. I think that what he was, if we look at what Evan was from that date that I mentioned earlier, so December 5th on, if we just look at what he was as a shooter in those final 50 games, where he took just under 4 a game at 38%, if that is who he is, and I'd like to see that number be a smidge higher, like 4.5 a game, I think would be good. But if that is who he is as a shooter, if he's taking 4 threes a game, making 38% of them, that's good. Would I love to see him take 7 a game and be a 45% shooter from 3? Sure. I don't think that's realistic. I don't think that's a fair ask. So I don't look at it and say, yes, he needs to get better shooting threes. I think it would be a good thing if he did, but I don't think that should be priority number 1 for him on offense. I think priority number 1 for him on offense should be focusing on his ball handling skills. I think if he becomes somebody that is able to get to his spots quicker, that can be a little bit more of an efficient dribbler, and I'm not talking like what his shooting numbers are on 2-point attempts in half-court settings. I'm more so talking, and it's kind of a minor gripe, and I think anything with a second-team All-NBA player is going to be a minor gripe. But I look at this and say, if he can get to his spots quicker, like some of his half-court 2-point offense is a little bit slow developing. And I think part of that is because he's not the world's greatest basketball handler. And nobody expects him to be Kyrie Irving with the handles, and that's fine. But I do think that is the area offensively that I look at and say, this is probably where he has the most room for growth. And if he does that, I think that is an area that you can look at and say, okay, well, he will then probably become a little bit more efficient. You will then see, because it's not just, the 3-point attempts were up. He was taking just under 13 field goal attempts per game. And of course, some of this is dependent on what the rest of the roster looks like. And we don't know what this Cavs team is going to look like. But he was taking just under, in those final 50 games, he was taking just under 13 field goal attempts per game. That number, I think, next year should probably be 16 or 17. And I think a way to do that would be for him to be able to, for the Cavs more frequently, to throw him the ball in the half court and say, Evan, go beat your guy off the dribble. Maybe not just take somebody to the low post, where I do think he's good at. I think he's got a solid back to the basket game. I think his touch around the rim was something that was much better this year than it had been in years past. And maybe I should have mentioned that in areas that he did improve, but I thought his finishing abilities around the rim looked better than they had before. So if you look at that and say, okay, well, how can we get more of that? How can we get Evan to the basket more? And I think that Evan creating for himself, creating off the dribble, is one of the areas that I look at and say, if he can do that better, I think it unlocks another dimension for the Cavs offensively. Donovan Mitchell is going to be back. We don't know if Darius Garland's going to be back. I imagine that he would. But right now, the Cavs have 2 guys in their starting 5 that are really good at creating for themselves off the dribble. I think Max Strus can do it a little bit, but I wouldn't put him in the really good category. Evan can do this. But I think if you go from having Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland as 2 guys in the starting 5 that can both create for themselves off the dribble, to having 3 guys in the starting 5 in Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, and Evan Mobley that can all create for themselves off the dribble, I think that's a really healthy place to be offensively. And I think that opens up another dimension for them as a team offensively. And then the one other thing I would like to see next year with Evan that I think would get more out of him is him playing more center. He has every year played more center than he did the year before. This has sort of been his progression as a basketball player. He's also played less small forward, which I think part of that was just a result of what the roster looked like. I don't necessarily think that he should be playing a ton of small forward ever at any point moving forward in his career. But you look at this and say, okay, well, if he plays more center, what would that do? And last year, I believe 52% of his minutes were at center, according to Cleaning the Glass. So if that 52% mark gets boosted up to 60%, is that going to be a good place for the Cavs to be? Is that going to be a good place for Evan Mobley to be? And I think that it's not as if every matchup in the NBA is great for him playing center. Like, I don't even want to say Joel Embiid because the guy never plays, but let's say the idea of Joel Embiid playing against that, probably not the best defensive matchup for Evan. Now, he's going to hold his own. He's going to do his best, but Joel is one of the best scorers in the NBA when he is healthy. He's just never healthy. So maybe matchups like that are difficult to play Evan at center all the time. But I think against like probably 75% of centers in the NBA, Evan Mobley is going to have an offensive mismatch, and he's going to be so good defensively that he can handle that group. And it's probably higher than 75% of centers that he's going to have an offensive mismatch. It's probably 85 to 90%. So as you look at that and say, okay, well, the Cavs are just going to be better there. And I also think that would give the ability for the Cavs, because as we've talked about with Evan's three-point shooting, that's going to give the Cavs the ability to be in a spot where they can play 5 out more frequently, as we've seen the Indiana Pacers do great things with in this postseason. And basketball is kind of cyclical, right? Like, we've kind of gone through an era now, and you saw Oklahoma City actually go away from this, which I was surprised about in game 1, where they changed their starting lineup to make an adjustment to how the Pacers play, which I did not think was a great sign for them, where they subbed Case and Wallace in for Isaiah Hartenstein. And instead of starting with 2 bigs, they started with 1 big. Well, maybe the Cavs start with 2 bigs next year, but I do think being in a situation where sometimes they can start with 2 bigs, sometimes they can start with 1 big, that might be a good place for them to be. So I think Evan playing center more, tightening up his handle, just continuing to improve in all facets offensively, which I do think will come along with tightening up his handle, is what Evan's offseason needs to look like. And if that's the case, I think you're going to feel really good about where Evan Mobley is going into next year, which will be year 5 for him. And I think you're going to feel even better about where the Cavs are at as a team. Now, there was a little bit of news, not to do with Evan Mobley, but to do with the Cavs assistant coaching staff, as Jordan Ott did take the job with the Phoenix Suns earlier this week. Going to touch on that one last time and say why I think it's actually a good thing that Kenny Atkinson's going to have to replace Jordan Ott on his coaching staff next, right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show is brought to you by Epicore. Every team knows the value of hard work, of taking pride in what you build and practicing every detail to get the very best results. But no one player, no matter how amazing, can do it all alone. Working together makes getting the win easier. And at Epicore, the All-Stars are the hardworking manufacturers and distributors who create and deliver things that we all need, from aerospace to electrical to medical devices. Epicore ERP solutions are created by industry experts to help make every day easier. Seeing your whole supply chain is easier. Managing logistics is easier. Responding to price changes is easier. From small businesses with big dreams to growing enterprises with global visions, they'll equip you with the right tools to move forward, think ahead, and lead the way. Because as the clock ticks down, you need to make the most out of every hardworking minute. Easier doesn't cut corners. Easier takes the lead. Discover your success at easierwithepicor.com. That is easierwithepicor.com. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. If you're watching on YouTube, as we get out of here, do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for us. Click subscribe. Hit that notification bell. So the Cavs officially lost Jordan Ott to the Phoenix Suns earlier this week. Ott, of course, was named the head coach of the Suns, replacing a number of coaches that have held that job over the last several years. Mike Budenholzer, the latest, and Jordan Ott will become the 4th different head coach for Phoenix in 4 years. And I think one of the things here, and I mentioned this with Chris Manning earlier this week, is how much better this coaching staff was for the Cavs under Kenny Atkinson than I think it has been in recent years. And I do think that Kenny Atkinson in year 1 in Cleveland assembled a very good staff. And if you've got 2 guys on your staff that are finalists for a head coaching job, because Johnny Bryant was the other finalist for the Suns job, and maybe he will be seriously considered for the New York Knicks job. We have not heard a ton about that as I record this Friday morning, but I think that's a really good sign. I think that's a sign too of respect across the league that you have, because it does say, at least in my opinion, that teams want to emulate what you have. Teams have seen, and I think that the Knicks firing Tom Thibodeau is related to this too, as I mentioned earlier this week. But teams have seen the jump the Cavs made, and Kenny Atkinson deserves a lot of credit. But it's not just Kenny Atkinson, because Kenny Atkinson is not a coach that rules with some iron fist. He's been very collaborative with his assistants, with his players, just organizationally. I think the Cavs are very collaborative, and I think that they do deserve a good chunk of credit for that. So when you see that, teams are going to say, we want some of that. We want what Jordan Ott brought to the Cavs. We want him to bring that to the Suns. I think Jordan will do well. I think this is a great opportunity for him, and I think the Suns made a good hire. But now the Cavs have to replace him. And part of this is the price of success. When you have success, the way the Cavs have had success, if you've got good people part of your program, other teams are going to want to bring that in. It is what it is. I think that you would rather be in a spot where your assistant coaches, I think it would be a great thing if every single year, and of course the NBA has a lot of turnover like this, but I think it would be a great thing if every single year the Cavs lose an assistant coach because an assistant coach in Cleveland gets hired to be a head coach somewhere else. I think that would be an outstanding thing organizationally for the Cavs. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen. Nobody knows if that's going to happen, but I do think that would be an awesome thing. Now, this does present, I think, a really good opportunity. I think a really good challenge for Kenny Atkinson to replace Jordan on his staff. I don't think we're going to hear very much about this until the offseason truly gets here for everybody, because there's still an opening out there. Don't know if Johnny Bryant's going to get that opening, as I said. And you look at this and say, okay, well, what is Kenny Atkinson going to be able to do? What voice is he going to be able to go get that maybe he has worked with before, maybe he hasn't worked with before? What voice is he going to be able to go get and be in a spot that's like that guy is going to come in and bring new ideas and help this team, help this organization grow? That is the challenge at hand for Kenny Atkinson. And I think that's a good challenge. And there is zero reason, especially after the staff that he put together in year one, there is zero reason to think that Kenny's going to do anything other than put together a great coaching staff in year two. It's not going to include Jordan Ott. We know that because he's gone. Maybe it won't include Johnny Bryant. We don't know that, but it'll be very interesting to see what this coaching staff looks like. I think while it's not the sexiest subplot to the offseason, considering how good I thought this coaching staff for the Cavs was this year compared to years past, I do think it's a very important subplot for the Cavs as this summer rolls along. Thank you for making today's Locked on Cavs your first listen. Thank you for making it your first listen every day. Another great week of Cavs content right here. We'll be back again on Monday. Cannot wait to keep the player review, season in review, stuff rolling along. And I've got a really good idea, a really fun idea. I'm not going to get to it next week. Like, we're not going to have, it's about a series of episodes. They're not going to debut it next week, but I am going to bring it up because I do want input on kind of what we want this to be about. I think it'll be a really fun summer project for everybody to listen to. I know it's one I'm certainly excited to put together, but I want to kind of unveil that next week and sort of dive into what we want to get out of it. And I certainly want listener feedback as we roll along there. But thank you for making today's episode your first listen. Thank you for making it your first listen every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked on Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching on YouTube as we get out of here, do us a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for us. Click subscribe. Hit that notification bell. And I'll be back on Monday talking more about the Cleveland Cavaliers.